Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia Gibson to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I am delighted to have secured this debate today, and I wish to thank my colleagues on the Backbench Business Committee for supporting my application. Mr Chair, I'm going to begin this debate with the hope that we can have a measured, clear analysis of the facts and the challenges that lie ahead, which are of material importance to Scotland and her prosperity. The implications for Scotland of leaving the European Union are profound and significant. Firstly, we need to consider the damaging effect that leaving the EU will have on Scotland's vital interests, both at home and abroad. And I don't think anybody can deny that we have a UK governing party that is hopelessly divided against itself, as the UK faces arguably the biggest challenge and upheaval it has faced probably since the Second World War. The Cabinet doesn't speak with one voice, it speaks with several confused and contradictory voices. So how can it enter into any negotiations with the EU inspiring any sort of confidence from any quarter? I will indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving way so early on in your debate. Would you accept that almost a third of SNP voters who voted to leave, or voted in the referendum to leave Scotland, also voted to leave the EU? So would you accept the SNP are divided on this as well?
Well,
Patricia Gibson.
That's quite an interesting point, and I hope to maintain a dialogue of respect in this debate. And I would simply gently remind the honourable member that former Tory leader and Prime Minister John Major has called the handling of Brexit bad politics, grand folly, dictated by ultra-Brexiteers, and, I quote, many electors now know they were misled. So how people voted in the EU referendum really is beside the point. I want to focus on the damage that's been done to Scotland, because I think a lot of people have watched the unfolding of the Brexit process with horror and alarm. The UK government's own leaked analysis has shown Scotland's GDP could face a hit of up to 9%, with analysis from Fraser of Allender Institute showing a hard Brexit could cost Scotland up to 80,000 jobs. What the final figure will be could be lower, could be higher. We've no idea at the moment. The Bank of England Governor, Mark Carney, has revealed that Brexit has already cost each household £900. I will indeed.
Stephen Kerr.
Yes, we don't really know at the moment. That is true of all forecasts in any context. We don't really know. But what we need to do is pull together our governments, our countries, our peoples, to make a success of what is now inevitably going to happen since the passing of the withdrawal bill into law. We are leaving the European Union. Therefore, we need to work together. But no one knows, but we make our own future. We are responsible for making our own future. We are the masters of our own fate.
Well, the honourable gentleman is correct, because we know that until everything is agreed, nothing is agreed. So in that context, it's hard to make final predictions. But I would simply say to the honourable gentleman that we have experts whose minds are, I would suggest, more academic on this issue than either his or my own, and their opinions matter.
Well, my honourable friend, give way.
And I'll just finish this point, I'll let the honourable lady in. Independent forecasters and the UK government's own analysis, the Fraser of Allender Institute, figures from HMRC, the Economic and Social Research Institute, the NFU, all of these people, all of these organisations have expressed real concern about what Brexit means for Scotland, and I would simply direct him to those sources, not to what I'm saying.
Joanna Cherry.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a powerful speech and, of course, making the point that members opposite cannot bear to hear, that business, the trade unions, all of civic society in Scotland is concerned about the impact of Brexit in Scotland. The honourable gentleman opposite said that we should be masters of our own fate. Doesn't she agree with me? The whole point of this debate is that the people of Scotland are not masters of their own fate because they are being taken out of the European Union against their democratic will.
Yeah. And the honourable lady makes an excellent point which needs no gilding from myself, but of course I wholeheartedly agree, and I'll come on to the people of Scotland in a few moments. An HMRC report showed that in 2013-14, EEA nationals paid £12.1 billion more income tax and national insurance than they took out in tax credits and child benefit in the UK as a whole. And EU nationals working in Scotland contribute an average of £34,000 to GDP. £34,000 to GDP. The rights of Scotland's current EU community must be protected and guaranteed as a matter of principle. 1 in 25 GPs in Scotland are EU citizens, the loss of which could affect potentially 226,000 patients. Regardless of whether these GPs are allowed to stay in Scotland, the fact is that Brexit itself has created something of a hostile environment for those who choose to live and work in the UK, and that in itself may create challenges with retaining EU citizens across the UK who have contributed so much to our communities. And asking these citizens to pay £65 per person, although not necessarily a large sum for some of our EU citizens, the principle of asking people to resubscribe to their own lives in a country where they have already contributed so much is something which shames the government and shames us as society and should be scrapped. I will indeed.
I agree with the honourable member that... Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I agree with the honourable member that we're asking EU citizens to do something unthinkable. Many of them have paid tax and national insurance in this country. But it does beg the question for me, if the SNP is so opposed to what is happening, why do you not back the people's vote and be straight with the people of Scotland that what you're actually doing is just trying to churn up the argument for independence? Why are you not straight with them and tell them that, or back the people's vote?
Mr Chair, you forgive me for tittering. You'll forgive me for tittering when a Lib Dem asked people to be straight with the people. We in the SNP are absolutely straight with the people of Scotland, and the people of Scotland are waking up to the fact that they have been misled. And you don't need to take my word for it. You just need to speak to John Major, your former leader and former Prime Minister, who has openly said that the people have been misled over Brexit. But of course, the people of Scotland weren't misled because we voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU. But that appears not to matter to the constituents that you represent.
Well, my honourable friend, does my honourable friend agree with me that what the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives conveniently choose to ignore is that a majority of Scottish voters in 2016 voted for Scottish political parties who said that they wanted to hold another independence referendum in the event of Scotland being taken out of the EU against their will? And whether they like it or not, there's a mandate in the Scottish Parliament for that second independence referendum, and it's time that they respected the democracy of that vote.
Indeed. But
ask honourable members to confine interventions to the length of a proper intervention, not to make speeches. Patricia Gibson.
And I would simply respond to the honourable lady by saying that is why the Lib Dems are increasingly irrelevant in UK and Scottish politics. I'll make some progress. We in the SNP believe that the government should negotiate to stay in the single market and the customs union, not least to protect the exchange of citizens' rights between the EU and the UK. And of course, another area of huge concern is Scotland's single market and custom union, is the importance of this single market and customs union to protect our social, trading and investment partnerships with EU businesses and governments. Scottish Government impact analysis has shown that a failure to remain in the single market and the customs union or to secure a free trade agreement would see Scotland's GDP around £12.7 billion lower by 2030 than it would be under continued EU membership. This would mean a loss equivalent to £2,300 per person for each person in Scotland. In addition, the impact analysis shows that in the event of a so-called Canada-type deal with the EU, would still leave Scotland's GDP £9 billion lower by 2030, or £1,610 per head. Scotland's food and drink exports have reached £6 billion, the highest level ever, with the EU being the largest market. However, the Economic and Social Research Institute reported that a hard Brexit would result in up to a 90% fall in exports to the EU from Scotland. These are important voices from industry, and all who care about Scotland's future economic prospects really should listen to them. The fact is that a hard Brexit would leave the UK isolated on the world stage and exposes the country to a regulatory race to the bottom that would compromise our trading relationships and consumer standards. The honourable member for Witham has said that Brexit was an opportunity for widespread deregulation. The Foreign Secretary has said, scrap social Europe. And Daniel Hannan, Tory MP, has said all contracts between employer and employee should be free contracts with no statutory protection. There is little question but that Brexit would see a bonfire of British workers' rights, given these words are coming from the governing party. I don't claim, Mr Chair, I don't claim to speak for the people of England, and nor should I, but I can tell you that we in Scotland are alarmed by these comments, and they go against the values and beliefs held so dear by the people of Scotland. The Secretary of State for International Trade is on the record as being, quote, relaxed about a diminution of food standards post-Brexit. The Secretary of State for the Environment has said he is opposed to this, and the Prime Minister has simply responded that the questions were, quote, hypothetical. The fact is that food standards that are currently banned across the EU may well become permissible in the UK post-Brexit, precipitating concerns about a proverbial race to the bottom. And our more lax standards, as well as having implications for animal welfare, and as well as having potential environmental and public health concerns, are they really the standards that we in Scotland will be expected to endure post-Brexit? Is this what was meant, Mr Chair, by taking back control? The UK is looking to pursue new trade deals, particularly with the US. Since we already know that procurement and public contracts is an important objective of the US in negotiating a trade deal, as demonstrated by the TTIP negotiations, then Scotland's public services are at risk of being bargained off in new agreements. And for the people of Scotland, this is simply unacceptable. And MPs across the House will know this, because they too will have received countless emails from constituents about this very issue. And if anybody in this chamber has received no emails about this issue, then they can feel free to intervene right now. The fact is, Mr Chair, many people in Scotland, and the numbers are growing, are bewildered. In Scotland, we had a referendum on EU membership for which there was no evidence that Scotland wanted. We in Scotland voted to remain in the EU by a very convincing majority, and now we are being removed against our will from a family of nations of which we wish to remain part. To add insult to injury, Scotland's voice in the UK negotiations has been summarily ignored. We all witnessed the farce of the 12th of June, with the implications of Scotland being dragged out of the EU, were allocated a mere 19 minutes, with not one Scottish MP from any party permitted to speak. No time for such debate was protected, and what we witnessed was an unprecedented ripping up of the devolution settlement, with Scotland's voice silenced. I will indeed.
On that issue of timing, does she recognise that in this Parliament we spent 252 hours debating Brexit and we'll have a number more, whereas in the Scottish Parliament it spent only 25 hours on legislation which was rushed through on an emergency basis? So I don't think it's right for her to be taking a high hand when it comes to dealing with time.
Well, the honourable gentleman may not be aware of this, so I'll enlighten him. Scotland did not vote for Brexit, but the negotiations for Brexit are being carried out by the UK Government. The UK Government is duty-bound to allow Scottish MPs in this place who represent people who did not vote for Brexit to have proper time to vote, to debate the implications of that, and the fact that the devolution settlement has been torn up, about which she appears to have no concern. Let us be clear. Let us be clear. The democratically elected Scottish Parliament voted overwhelmingly by 95 votes to 32, with every single party, SNP, Liberal Democrats, Labours, the Greens, all save the Tories, against repatriating powers to London. During the standing orders debate in the Commons chamber on the 13th of June, Mr Chair, I was stunned to hear Scottish Tory MPs from the benches dismiss the lack of legislative consent, this power grab, by saying words, and I'm paraphrasing, and just let me finish the point, please, by paraphrasing things like, oh, what does it matter? It's only powers over this, that or the other. Well, Mr Chair, they may say that, but when you ignore the entire concept of consent, when you ride roughshod over democratic institutions elected by the people of Scotland, which this Tory government in Westminster has not listened to, then you do so at your peril. I will indeed.
Thank you. Very, very grateful for giving way. But I just want to deal with this issue about the power grab. Last week, the Scottish Government, First Minister, attempted to do a government reshuffle, which created the biggest Scottish government in history which reflects an expanding power base of the Scottish Government. So how on earth can she claim there's been a power grab when there's more ministers, more cabinet secretaries in the Scottish Government than ever before, and there's 18 new powers coming to the Scottish Government on the date of Brexit?
Well, it's actually quite interesting that a member of the Tory party is concerned about the public purse. And it's good that he is concerned about the public purse and the expanded government in Scotland. Perhaps he should take up his concerns about the expanding public purse in these times of austerity, about the ever-expanding, dripping roast that is the House of Lords. Yeah, I'm sure that the Prime Minister would be happy. I'm dealing with this one. I'm dealing one at a time. Hang on a minute. Excuse me, Mr. Chair. And also, you'll find that the current Prime Minister's cabinet has also expanded as she tries to hold together an unholy coalition of Brexiteers and people with a bit of sense in the cabinet, of which there are increasingly few. I will give way now.
I have a simple question to ask the Honourable Lady. If there is a power grab, why did Nicola Sturgeon expand her cabinet? It is because there are new powers now and new powers coming. Is that not factually correct?
No. Mr. Chair, it's that kind of attitude that has seen our membership soar by 10,000 in a very short period of time. Because if you're going to say if there's a power grab, suggesting there has not been a power grab, in the devolution, if you make an intervention, you have to let me answer. That's how the game works. Because it appears for some of us this is a game. But this is actually about your country of Scotland, the people you represent. So perhaps, if you let me speak, we can maybe get somewhere. Mr. Chair, the fact is, to even dismiss the fact there's a power grab shows a contempt for devolution that is breathtaking. Now, under the Scotland Act, and can I finish my point? Mr. Chair, this is... Doesn't stop people shouting. Yeah, I know, it's really lacking. You don't get this in Scottish Parliament, Mr. Chair. The fact is, Mr. Chair, to even suggest there has not been a power grab treats the Scottish Parliament with contempt, but you really should go back and look at the devolution settlement. Anything that is not reserved is devolved, and therefore should correctly come back to the Scottish Parliament. When you start ignoring legislative consent, which has served the Parliament well for the 20 years for which it has existed, when you start ignoring that, you cross a Rubicon and you get to the point where you just do what you like and ignore the Scottish Parliament anyway. And I don't think that is treating the sovereign people of Scotland with respect, because the people in Scotland are sovereign. I'll make some progress. Holyrood is not Westminster, and in Scotland, sovereignty lies with the people, which brings me on to this beautiful point I was making, Mr. Chair. Under the Constitution rules, this government should not proceed with any measure affecting Scotland without the Scottish Parliament's consent. And for the record, because I know there's been some perhaps willful confusion about this, but confusion nonetheless, for the record, the kind of powers being clawed back by Westminster we're talking about are over 24 areas where it wants to retain power in the wake of Britain's exit from the EU, including areas such as agriculture, fisheries, food labelling and public procurement. And, Mr. Chair, public procurement is particularly interesting because that could constitute an attack on our public services. And I have sat and listened to Scottish MPs in the Tory ranks who have rubbished concerns at these powers being clawed back, as you've heard today, as though they don't matter. They do matter, and anyone who doubts it only has to, as I have already directed them to, look at the soaring membership of the SNP after the power grab was brought to public attention. I've also heard the SNP being accused of trying to effectively veto Brexit. However, the legislative consent that was withheld by every party save the Tories. I'm in the middle of a point, so the argument that this is some kind of SNP plot simply doesn't wash. And let there be no mistake, the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament recognises that there may be times, and this is the point you really have to listen to, because I know that I've heard you rubbish this in the past, there may be times when UK-wide frameworks are required post-Brexit, and that would be in Scotland's interests as well. However, the way to achieve such frameworks is through negotiation. This is what a statesman or a stateswoman would do. That, Mr. Chair, is grown-up politics. Achieving UK-wide frameworks should not be achieved by strangling the voice of those democratically elected to speak for Scotland. A standoff, as we currently have, is in no one's interests, and that's why it's important to bring forward emergency legislation to remove Clause 11 from the withdrawal bill. Devolution, Mr Chair, cannot operate on the terms of grace and favour. To take powers restricting the competence of Holyrood and to exercise those powers in the face of an explicit decision by Holyrood that it should not is, whatever way you look at it, a power grab. Under devolution, that which is not reserved is devolved. It is as simple and as important as that. Make no mistake, this is about being able to adjust the terms on which devolution operates through delegated legislation without the consent or even against the wishes of the Scottish Parliament. And, of course, I am fleetingly reminded the fact that we were told how important it was to have English votes for English laws. Well, I wonder when we're going to have Scottish votes for Scottish laws. Many who are hostile to the Scottish Parliament have tried to dismiss the concerns raised by the Scottish Parliament about hard Brexit and Scotland's voice being silenced as a ploy to promote independence. But that is not the case. This is about something, Mr Chair, that some people in this chamber would do well to remember. This is about standing up for Scotland and is supported even by those in the Scottish Parliament who do not support independence and are not yet convinced of the case for independence. But I say today, I'm finishing up, I say today, those who value the Union, beware. Beware that whenever the next referendum on Scottish independence comes, and come it will, the debate has been crystallised. Chuntering from a sedentary position, Mr Chair, the debate has been crystallised like never before. The people of Scotland will be asked simply, who do you trust most to govern in the best interests of Scotland, Westminster or Holyrood? Given what we have witnessed over recent weeks and months, it doesn't take too great a leap of the imagination to guess what the answer will be from the people of Scotland. The matters we are discussing today are not just about Brexit or devolution or Scotland's economic interests. They are ultimately about trust. And every day, this Tory government demonstrates just a little bit more that they cannot be trusted by the people of Scotland. We are not the valued and equal partners we were told when we were being love-bombed during the 2014 referendum campaign. And the people of Scotland know it. And I urge all who care about Scotland now to be her voice. Stand up for her interests. The people of Scotland are sovereign and will not have their voices overridden by Westminster without consequence. Dismiss them at your peril.
Hear, hear.